So I think the first moment when I really connected with animals and it kind of put me on the path was when I was 4 years old. I actually looked down onto my plate, and for the first time, I had a realization that what was on my plate in front of me, it wasn't some harmless piece of food, but it was in fact the body of an individual who wanted to live. I was I was sitting at this table, and I remember vividly looking down, and I saw this dinner roll that I had with this piece of deer flesh. And I heard my uncles having a conversation behind me. They were hunters, and it was at that moment that I pieced it all together. And what I think is most telling about this is that I went to I was horrified, and I go to my parents, and I didn't say I'm going to be a vegetarian, I'm going to be a vegan, I don't want to eat meat, I don't want to eat venison. I went to my parents and I said I don't want to eat animals. And it was just so cut and dry, so clear. There was no rationalizations, there was no nutrition, there was no plants though, there was no it was just very simple that I didn't want to be a part of that. And so from that moment at 4 years old, I went vegetarian without knowing what the word vegetarian means, and it was really challenging throughout the course of my life, not only because I'm from Iowa, which is a state that kills more pigs than any state and animal agriculture is everywhere, but also because my family was religious. And so, on one hand, it's God gave us animals for food, pulling me really hard in one direction. And on the other hand, it's just this personal feeling like, what is going on? Like, this is so horrifying, and I just want no part of it. So I was a silent vegetarian for throughout my entire childhood. And one thing that this kind of gives me inspiration that this is who we all actually are as people. None of us really want to hurt animals. People don't want to be complicit in this, and it's only because we live in a world that normalizes it to such an extent that it continues to persist. But that should give us hope as animal rights activists, that we're not trying to convince people of some radical new value. We're actually just trying to connect them to the values which they already hold. You look throughout the internet, there's all these pictures of all these poor kids, traumatized at this very similar experience to what I had. So anyways, in my case, I grew up and I was this silent vegetarian, very conflicted for religious reasons, for, that's what my family is supposed to do, for am I healthy, my family with very good intentions. Not only was it the religion that they were telling me, it was also the health aspects, that I wasn't going to be healthy, this sort of a thing. And it wasn't until adulthood when I kind of changed my mind on some religious ideas and learned more about the nutritional side of it. And yeah, lo and behold, that 4-year-old was right all along. And so, fast forward 20 years, and I think I've been making up for that silence, let's say, by going vegan. And, once I learned that, dairy and eggs have their own problems, going vegan and shortly after becoming an activist. There was a lot of animals that were part of my life as a kid, and I had a lot of connections with kind of every animal I would come across. The first dog that I ever had as a companion at home, his name was Rex, and we were super excited about him. Got him as a puppy and took him out boating and kind of everywhere we went. And it was a really special bond, and it certainly solidified the connection that I felt with animals during my that would have been like my teenage years up until I moved away from home. But yeah, that would be the most formative connection that I had in my development towards becoming vegan and an activist. Around that same time period when I was a kid and my family had hunters in it, and I hesitate to say this because they're good people. I think as all people really are, caught up in a system, but there were family members who were just playing a pretty cruel prank, very cruel, and they had a deer that they'd killed, and they had a deer that was strung up, and they painted the deer's nose red, and they did this was Christmas time. And as a kid, I wasn't fooled. I didn't think I had Rudolph here before me, but it really it shocked me, and it was secondhand trauma. They talk about this, that you see another being that's just subjected to just this, not only being killed, but then just this utter disrespect for that individual. And that's not really the maybe the prettiest story that people want to think of how you come to this realization. I mean, here I'm going to kindergarten, and it's be kind to others and be polite and say please and thank yous and all these common courtesies, and I'm just looking around, and at that moment it's like everyone around me is monsters, like my mom and my dad, my whole family, everybody around me, and it was just really troubling. And it was one of those things that kind of I pushed it down because I just had to cope, basically, and so for a long time I suppressed that up until later in adulthood with some education and some confidence that I can be true to the person I've been all along. So I learned some facts about the meat and dairy industry. At the time I'm a vegetarian, and I think that's probably pretty harmless, and you learn about the male chicks, you learn about the male calves, and that is a big wake-up call. And from there it was the University of YouTube and Gary Yourofsky and some other videos that set me on that path. And I was in the Army at the time, which is, they sort of think that it's kind when they offer vegetarian options. There's one vegetarian option, so that was pretty limiting. But, it's just an inconvenience that you figure out a way to work around, and that part of it was fine. Not having, practically any vegans around me, and animal rights activism is practically unheard of in Iowa. I found it very difficult to get anything going as far as community building, which I guess this is more the activism side, but that kind of led me to the path that led me to where I am today. Actually, I went through the phases that I think are pretty typical, where you're first become vegan, and then you want to tell the whole world about it, and you aren't super skilled about how to go about it, and I'm literally having Facebook arguments with people till the point I'm getting cramps, it's like soreness, tension in my shoulders and my neck from this. And there's one Thanksgiving that I'm not particularly proud of, but I was with my family and had a few drinks, and it was just super super brash, and it was like, I'm right, so therefore I can be kind of verbally abusive type of a thing. Then you kind of see past that, and I think I'm kind of moving to a path of something that's going to be better for not only the people around me, but ultimately more impactful for animals, kind of through my evolution. I was a truck driver for a while. I also drove truck in the military, and that part of it isn't so bad. You pack whatever you want for lunch and you drive around. Fortunately, we're in a day and age, I think, that the alternatives are so much better and so much more affordable than they used to be. And I think that if you're living in the U.S., if you're living in a developed country, the options are there. There's a little bit of, an adjustment period and figuring out what goes with what and what you can eat. But I don't have a lot of money. It's something that's super accessible. Different kinds of beans and nuts and fake meats, quote unquote fake meats, and different kinds of milk. Cashew ice cream is at better, it's just like right up there. There's like no difference. There's just a million reasons to not do it, and very much in the way of why what reason is there not to do it. So that I think it's a lot easier than you think, and you're going to feel a lot better about it. But at the same time, if for whatever reason it doesn't happen right away, know that there's a big system at play here, and frankly, even if you're vegan, you're still causing some sort of harm. So I think what's most important is not even just this consumerist choice we're making, is as good as it is, but the power of veganism really lies in making this statement of activism, and you're signaling to the world that discrimination is not okay, that you're not okay with the commodity status of animals. So I would, maybe even before you're fully vegan, you start looking at what can I actually do to challenge this system? Is there things I can do in the activist realm? That can be something like Facebook. That could be like something like going to demos with SAVE, with Anonymous for the Voiceless, with Direct Action Everywhere. You can go to these demos, when you're not actually vegan. That's actually something I think the activist world should really be open to. So, don't be too, try to change, try to do better all the time, from an activism front, from a veganism front, but also don't beat yourself up, because we all have a role to play imperfect as we all are.
And what advice would you give to somebody in the military, because you were there in a vegetarian position? What would you give to somebody in the military that is vegetarian, or especially vegan, or wanting to go vegan while in the military? Is that possible? Are they even able to do something like that?
I think for most folks it's possible. I mean, if you're in a very specific scenario when you're like in basic training and you're out in the field, I'm actually not too up to date. Maybe over the past few years things have improved, but it's close to impossible in those very specific scenarios. But I mean, once you have a little more freedom to move around and to do what you want, it's certainly possible. If you can, have more food choices, you can go off base. Like the options are there, and certainly if the options are not there, then I would highly recommend kind of putting that out there to somebody and asking for this, because that's certainly something that they ought to be. Frankly, they shouldn't be using animals at all, but at a minimum, they ought to be accommodating to people who don't want to use animals.
This video was made possible with support from amazing viewers like you. Thank you. If you'd like to consider donating, please check for our latest trip fundraiser or ask about your preferred donation method. We publish all trip expenses with proof of where your donations went, because transparency is our highest priority. Thank you for living with love, compassionate people, and together we will make a vegan world.